Welcome back to another episode of Revealing Biblical Truths. We are continuing to go through the book of Genesis and starting in chapter 32 and going through to chapter 37. Before we get started, go ahead and like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment down below if you want me to make videos on other topics. So Genesis 32 starts out and Jacob sees an army of angels, which he then calls that place Mahanim from the word Makane, meaning army or encampment. He told the messengers to go down to Esau, his brothers, and deliver a message, which was that he had left Laban and wants to find grace with Esau. The messengers come back and say Esau is coming to meet him, and he has 400 men with him. Jacob was afraid, and he split his people and things into two camps so no one could escape. So one party could escape. He prayed, and Yah told him to return to his country. Well, Jacob got a bunch of animals and sent them ahead as a present to Esau, and told his servants to tell Esau that these were presents from Jacob. He did these with three groups, hoping that it would appease Esau. After sending his wives over the river, he was left alone, and then he wrestled someone until the next morning. He was going to lose, but he touched the thigh of the man, but saw his own thigh was hollow at the joint. When morning came, the man asked to be let go, but Jacob wouldn't let him go until he was blessed. The man then said his name will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, or Yasharel, the upright in El. And Jacob then asked him his name. He doesn't answer, but he blesses Jacob. And then Jacob called the place Peniel, saying that he has seen the face of Elohim and lived. Peniel in Hebrew comes from the root word Panim, meaning face, or meaning Elohim, and El meaning Elohim, and that ends chapter 32. In chapter 33, he sees Esau, and Esau runs to meet him and embraces him. He then shows him his wives and children. Esau asks him about the gifts, and Jacob insists that he take it, because he has enough and he has been blessed. So Esau takes them and returns to Seir, while Jacob arrives in Salem, later called Jerusalem. He buys a field from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of silver, and calls it El Elohe Israel, and that ends chapter 33. In chapter 34, Dinah goes out to see the daughters of the city, and Shechem sees her and takes her and rapes her, but he says that he loves her. He tells his father to make her his wife. Hamor then goes out to meet Jacob and asks him about Dinah, and says he will give him his daughters as well. Jacob and his sons are very angry, and Jacob tells Hamor that he cannot give Dinah to him without being circumcised. He agrees and tells his people that they need to be circumcised, and then they will get Dinah. So they get circumcised, but on the third day they were all sore from the procedure, and Shimon and Levi took their swords and came into the city and killed all the males. They killed Shechem and Hamor too, and took Dinah back. They also spoiled the city, taking the animals, their wealth, even their women and children. Jacob then was scared that the Canaanites will overtake them because of what they had done, and they only had a few in their family. So in chapter 35, Yah tells Jacob to go to Bethel. So Jacob left Shechem and gathered his idols and put them under the terebinth tree there. They came to Bethel, and Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, so they buried her under a tree there, and they called the place Alon Bakuth, which means the oak of weeping. They continued on and were almost to Ephrath, which is also called Bethlehem, when Rachel was in hard labor. She ended up dying there while giving birth to her son, which she called Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. But Jacob called his name Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. Jacob then buried Rachel there, and continued to the tower of Edar, called Migdal Eder, meaning the tower of the flock. After they were there, Reuben slept with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine, which Jacob had heard about. Then Jacob comes to his father later, Isaac, and Isaac dies, being 180 years old, and that ends chapter 35. Chapter 36 goes through the genealogies of Esau. It is noted that his wives were of the Canaanites, which Yah told Jacob not to do. The Canaanites were known for idolatry, as well as being giants. So Esau, his wives, and his children went to live in the land of Mount Seir. He had 3 wives, Ada, Aholibamah, and Bashemath, and his sons' names were Eliphaz, Reuel, Jeush, Jaalam, and Korah. It further discusses Esau's grandsons, which are called dukes. It then talks about Seir the Horite and his children. The word Horite comes from the root word Hor, which means hole. It is believed that these people lived in the caves in the Mount Seir area. The word Seir actually means hairy he-goat or goat demon. Could it be possible that Seir and his children were human-goat hybrids from the Watchers? Leviticus 17:7 says, "So that they may no longer sacrifice their sacrifices to the goat demons with which they play the harlot. This shall be a permanent statute to them throughout their generations." That word there is Seirim. The same word also appears in Isaiah and 2 Chronicles, and also in the book of Jasher, chapter 61, verses 14 to 15, it talks about Zepho, the grandson of Esau, and states, "And it was one day that Zepho lost a young heifer, and he went to seek it, and he heard it lowing around about the mountain. And Zepho went and saw, and behold, there was a large cave at the bottom of the mountain, and there was a great stone there at the entrance of the cave. And Zepho split the stone, and he came into the cave, and he looked, and behold, a large animal was devouring the ox. From the middle upward it resembled a man, and from the middle downward it resembled an animal. And Zepho rose up against the animal and slew it with his swords." The rest of the chapter continues to talk about the generations of Seir and the kings of Edom. Now, chapter 37 begins, and Joseph, at age 17, gets a coat from his father, a coat of many colors. When his brothers saw that he was loved more than them, they hated him for it. Well, Joseph has a dream where they were in the field as sheaves, and their sheaves bowed down to his sheaf. He also had another dream where the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed to him also. This represents his father, his mother, and his 11 brothers. They hated him for that too. They went to Shechem to feed their flocks, and Israel tells Joseph to go find them. He eventually finds them in Dothan, just north of Shechem, but before he could reach them, they had already plotted to kill him and throw him into a pit, saying that some beast did it. But Reuben convinced the others not to kill him, but to just throw him into the pit. So when he came, they took his coat off and threw him in the pit. Then they saw that some Ishmaelites heading down to Egypt, and Judah convinced the others to let them sell him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. Then Joseph was taken to Egypt. After that, the brothers devised a plan to dip his coat in the blood of a goat and bring it to their father, saying it was the animal that killed him. The story is a parallel to Yahusha. He was rejected by the tribes of Israel. He was cast into the pit of Sheol by his death. His body, being symbolic of the coat of many colors, had blood shed on it, and he was also sold for silver. Well, Jacob believed the story and tore his clothes and sat in sackcloth in mourning. Then Joseph ended up being sold to Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard and officer of Pharaoh. And that ends chapter 37. Next time on Revealing Biblical Truths, incest and a red ribbon? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Thanks for watching. Shalom.